Hello everybody, welcome back to the Sleep Mechanics Talks and Game Strategy Guide series. In this episode, I'm going over something that I've been working for quite some time on. I've been looking into it, and that is the pity proc mechanic. Now, this is kind of a mechanic that is a bit less known because the game doesn't flat out tell you that it exists. They mentioned it in an update notes a long time ago, back very early on, when they were still kind of trying to define what the different specialties did. But a lot of people don't even know that this mechanic exists. It's almost like a secret mechanic, and I kind of wanted to discuss it today because it's actually more significant than what I thought it was going to be. This whole video kind of started as just me being like, I wonder if there's some extra little nuance and patterns that I can find to make a discussion about, just to like explain this mechanic, because you know what, might be kind of fun to explain the mechanic. But then I found some interesting implications that I wasn't expecting to find, and thought, man, this is actually like impactful to some strategy in the game with certain skill specialists. Now, in order to get into it, I do have to define what a pity proc is. Now, to explain all this, there's this nice game mechanics page on the Raichu website. I will link it in the description if I remember to. If I don't, please somebody remind me in the comments so that I can go back and link it later, because I do want to give them credit where credit is due. A lot of the math and stuff that I've done with this comes around this equation that they have derived here on the Raichu website. Now, what a pity proc is, basically, if a helper Pokemon reaches a certain number, then eventually the game forces them to proc their skill. The idea is if you're having terrible luck, they want it that your skill specialists are still going to be doing something, and you can't get totally screwed by just bad RNG. So they make it that after a certain amount of helps, after so much time, eventually your helper Pokemon just will proc a skill, and it's guaranteed. Now, it differs from Pokemon to Pokemon, what its pity proc help count is, as you can see, as they've defined here. And yeah, the Raichu team goes into more detail about how it works. And a common misconception about the pity proc system is that if you swap a team member out, it'll reset the pity proc help count. But that is not the case, actually. Data miners have found that taking a member off the team and then putting it back on does not reset its failure counter back to 0. The only time that it sets it back at all is if it has its skill ready, then it sets its failure count one more by proccing the skill. If you then change a team member to take it off the team while it has the skill procced, and you waste that proc, then it sets it back one, because it technically didn't fail, but you didn't collect it either, so they don't reset the proc count. Instead, they just set it back one to account for the fact that it really didn't fail. But that's what the only weirdity with swapping the teams out. Obviously, you swap out a team member, then that one specifically will putting it back does not reset its failure count to 0. Yeah, so yeah, you could be swapping your team around just fine. There's no problems with flexibility with the pity proc system. Now, the way they handle calculating the pity proc systems on Raichu is, well, first I want to show a little example. So, if we look at Raichu's page, his proc rate is 1.9%. If we look at Golduck's, it's 12.5%. But if we look in the Pokedex functionality, as long as we have the accounting for pity procs enabled skill rate, then it shows different numbers than what we saw back there. Golduck comes to 12.54 as compared to the 12.5, and Raichu, instead of 1.9, shows it being 2.59%. Those are different than what we saw back there, and that's because of how Raichu calculates for pity procs. If you set it to raw only, then sometimes you need to refresh the page, but you'll see that those numbers go back to what they actually are. Now, where that's interesting is the way that they handle it, and I think this is a genius solution by them. They basically used this formula down here, to calculate what percentage of proc, what is the proc percentage increased by the presence of the Pokemon's pity proc counter. So they use a little formula down here. I'm not exactly sure how they got this derivation. They explain it here. I'm pretty good with math, and I think I have an understanding of it, but not enough to explain it to somebody else. So if you want to really know more about this, just read this little article. It's not very long, but this is the modeling that they use now to get that conclusion. Now, why does this matter? Well, basically, if a Pokemon is going to be pity procking, this is a weird... I've made a couple spreadsheets here, and I want to explain this concept pretty well. The reason why this matters is because, effectively, skill triggers have diminishing returns because of the pity proc system, but not in the similar way that a lot of other diminishing return mechanics worked in this game. It's going to be different from Pokemon to Pokemon on how much the pity proc system is going to be causing diminishing returns on skill trigger skills. Because if you look at here, and here's my explanation of why this happens. So, here I've color-coded, if we have a skill, let's pretend we have a skill that after 2 procs is guaranteed to happen. This doesn't happen at all. I think the lowest pity proc counter in the game is like 23 on a Bonsly, if I'm right, or something like that. Maybe it's like 32, I'm not sure. But it's pretty low like that, but nothing as low as 2. If we have a skill that is guaranteed to proc after 2 procs, and there's 3 different potentials of what it could be, 1 in 3 odds of it succeeding versus 2 in 3 odds of it succeeding. This is all the different possible combinations that we can have of those 4 of the first 4 helps. And as you can see here, 1 is a failure, 2 is a failure on this side, 3 is a success. But a yellow one here would be an artificially generated pity proc that is guaranteed to happen because the red, it's failed once. So, you can see on this side that we have 108 successes of these samples, and we have 76 pity procs that are occurring, totaling to 183 procs total. That is a 56% skill trigger rate, effectively. But we only had a 33% success rate to begin with. So, as you can see, this system actually does make a significantly different amount. And as you can see here, I put in 60%. This number here is if we apply the Rain on X formula to it. What we get now, this number is a little bit lower because they're doing it on infinite scale. I did it with a bounded scale of 4. But it's close. You can see that their estimation is, in fact, accurate. And over here, we've done the same thing, but if we now increase the odds to 2 in 3, how does that function differently? Well, you can see just visually here, this is why I wanted to do this, you can see visually here that, yes, you increase the amount of green procs, you increase the amount of randomly generated procs that could happen throughout the course of this, but you're decreasing the amount of yellow procs, which means that ultimately, yes, you're increasing the amount of total procs, and that will always be the case when you're increasing skill trigger rate. But it's not by the percentage that you're actually increasing the proc rate by, because by increasing the proc rate, you're eating into the pity procs that are being generated as well. And you can see we have 216 total procs over here, double what's over here, because, well, we doubled the odds. And we only have 22 pity procs, which is a 71% decrease to the amount of pity procs just in this simulated amount, a 100% boost to the amount of total procs, a 100% boost in the base rate, but it leads to only a 30% increase to the overall number of procs, which the new expected is 75% based off the Ranix formula, and here we have a 73% success rate based off of this. So you can just visually see here how those extra green ones are taking up spots that would have otherwise been yellow ones that would have been guaranteed, and why these skill triggers actually create diminishing returns. Now, this is just a hypothetical example to visually demonstrate it. I didn't use actual numbers in the game because the charts would be way, 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 way bigger, and I wouldn't be able to actually show that on screen for you, and I wouldn't have the time to make that. So this is what you're going to have to work with for a visual explanation of it. But how much of a difference does it actually matter? Well, it differs from various Pokemon to Pokemon. Now here, I've done my magic in the spreadsheets. I've calculated out how different things affect them based off of the different like combinations of skill triggers and speeds affects them. Now, where this often comes into a conversation is if we look here, they say possible strategic impacts. The pity system somewhat raises the value of increasing the helping speed, as faster helps allow helpers to reach their pity proc more quickly. If you think about it, skill trigger M increases the amount of overall procs by increasing the number of random procs at the expense of pity procs. Helping speed is increasing the speed to which you reach your random procs and also you reach your pity procs. So instead of increasing one at the expense of the other, helping speed is increasing both of them. So it means that speed is actually more valuable than it would be on, say, an ingredient specialist where it doesn't have this system implemented. And I just wanted to make a comparison of what does the actual difference look like. And for most Pokemon, most skill specialists, you can see that the overall difference that the pity proc system makes, I mean, helping speed is still inferior to skill modifiers. Like here we have a skill trigger nature compared to a speed up nature. And for most Pokemon, the skill trigger nature does significantly better. This is skill trigger M compared to help speed M, and then we get into some more complicated combinations later on. But what's very, very interesting is I was like, how can we predict which Pokemon benefit less and more from skill trigger M? And I decided to index them based off of just a collection of stuff over here. And I created this index on the far right-hand side to calculate kind of a rough idea, generate a number to put a numerical representation to how much they're impacted by skill natures or skill subskills overall. And basically the lower this number is, the less a skill subskill will help them. The higher this number is, the more a skill subskillar nature will help them. And you can notice that it correlates pretty heavily that the ones over here that have the bigger numbers are the ones that have the higher proc rates, which makes sense. Now, it's not perfect because they do have varying pity proc amounts. By the way, little fun fact, I did in fact learn that the various Pokemon in this game, the pity proc count is evaluated based on roughly 40 hours. If you take 40 hours of time, so that's 144,000 seconds, and divide that by their base rate, then that is what roughly, and you then round that number, that is roughly what most of the skill specialists in the game have as their pity proc count. And what's funny is if you go to any non-skill specialist, I could tell you right off the top of my head what their pity proc count is without even thinking. This guy, Blastoise, is going to be 78. The reasoning for that is because every single ingredient and berry specialist has a pity proc count of 78. So it doesn't really impact them as much because the highest that we get with that formula that I was talking about is Raichu's, given that it is the fastest. And it has a pity proc counter of 68. So even the highest pity proc count on any Pokemon in the game that is a skill specialist is still lower than the amount that every single berry and ingredient specialist has in the game. So that is where that comes down to. Now, as for implications here, so what's very interesting is that on the Legends specifically, it really is more in favor of speed actually being a viable alternative to skills. In fact, you'll notice here a skill nature versus a speed nature. On Raichu, a speed nature is actually better than a skills nature. In fact, I created a little chart over here with a lot of data, and I noticed that I put down the baseline of 1.9. The actual boost that's produced by a skill up nature or skill down nature, the decrease in productivity on a skill down nature came to 9.91%, which was very significant to me because the boost from a speed up nature is 11.1%. And if you multiply those together, that comes out to roughly 1, which is why I threw this in here. I just wanted to see. And here's where I'm testing my theories and my charts against in Rain on X. I put these Raikus out there, And you can see here, calm one versus neutral one versus speed up, skill down. And they're all producing roughly 2.66 or 2.67. That's such a small difference that it's basically negligible per day, that a speed up nature is basically the same as a skill down nature on a Raichu. Now, that is if they don't have any skill trigger subskills. As you can see down here, if they just have one skill trigger subskill, that skill trigger nature is going to work. It's going to work in tandem with the skill or against the skill, meaning you're actually going to get differences then. But so if you have any subskills that increase skills, as you probably do want, then you still obviously want a neutral or a positive skill or nature. But if it doesn't have any skill trigger subskills, on a Raichu specifically, it doesn't make a difference at all. Which just blew my mind, because you always hear about how bad a skill trigger down nature is on a skill specialist. But there's data to show here that on Raichu, it really doesn't matter as much. This certainly makes me feel better about my Raichu, because mine has this exact nature, naughty, which is funny. But especially if it's speed up specifically, and speed down is far more hurtful than what it would seem on a Raichu. Now, the difference between this Raichu and this Raichu, even with just skill trigger M, is still less than 6%, which is a lot more manageable than what it would be on other skill specialists. As you can see based off my indexing, Golduck specifically is the one that has... Oh, whoops. What did I just do there? Okay. I've never done that in Google Sheets before. Give me a moment. Okay. As you can see based off my indexing, the Golduck is the Pokemon that gains the most from skill trigger subskills. And it all makes sense because the Golduck is naturally almost never going to be reaching that pity proc point anyway, because it has such a high natural base rate that it's not really losing much by eating away at the few pity procs it is getting. Whereas the Raikou is getting there all the time, so it makes sense that that is the case with the Golduck. So, comparative on a Golduck, yeah, skill trigger down is a killer. But Raikou is not as bad, because it's still pity procking as long as it's got the speed. So, now, I do want to say, other legends have a higher proc rate than Raikou does. They are more impacted by this. As you can see, Entei, there's a slight difference here and an even bigger difference down here. So even if you just drift a little bit away from the Raikou is really the one who cares more, like, equally as much about speed as he does about skills, just because it's got such a low base rate that it really doesn't matter what you do to that. It's going to be pity procking a lot anyway. Now, other Pokemon that I think are notable for mentioning this with, based off my index that I created here, are any of them that are like significantly lower. I've noticed both of the Berry Burst Pokemon have a pretty low score here. Not as low as the Legends, but decently low. So on a Braviary or on a Mimikyu, speed is going to be more impactful than skill triggers. You can see here that the difference between a Help Speed M, Skill Trigger M, and Speed Up Nature compared to Skill Trigger M, Skill Trigger S, So Triple Trigger here is what this column represents. This column represents if you have Help Speed M, Skill Trigger M, and then a Speed Up Nature. For both of these guys, basically identical to Triple Trigger, which is crazy because everybody wants Triple Trigger. I still don't get the craze about it, especially after doing this analysis, but you can see that it makes Triple Triggers better on a Golduck. But on them, it's about the same. And on the Legends, the Help Speed M, Speed Up Nature, and Skill Trigger M is actually better than Triple Trigger. So, it's not the best combo. It's not even the second best combo in the game for the Legends. And this varies from Pokemon to Pokemon based off of what this index comes out to be. Now, I did also make a nice little chart down here to kind of show what... how each one values, that's what this entire page is for, how each combination of skill triggers is valued across different base rates. I didn't bring this all the way up to Golduck and Umbreon because they have exceptionally high. I consider them as outliers. Golduck and Umbreon have stupidly high proc rates that extending it out to them would be just showing a lot of extra data that I feel like would misrepresent what's actually going on because it would stretch it all and make this look not as significant. But you can see that, like, down to Raichu, it's only benefiting from triple trigger by like 47%. Meanwhile, a Slow King, which is going to be the highest end of this graph, is benefiting from like 83%, 84% almost. So it does really make a significant impact. That is a difference of a 40% boost off of base rate. The difference between triple trigger down there and up there. So, yeah, implications of this. I mean, we all knew that speed was good, so this really doesn't change anything about how we evaluate a skill specialist overall, because speed has always been known as good, but maybe it's more valuable. I think it brings less value to double triggers and triple triggers for certain species, primarily for Braviary, Mimikyu, the Legends especially, and Wigglytuff, another one that has a notably low index. So if you're looking for a Wigglytuff early game, you know what? 6.15 on this index, it's notably lower. You can see that combo, this thing is like close again. But yeah, that's really all the research that I did for pity procs. I would love to hear some of your guys' thoughts about this mechanic and how it all works. And if anything, if you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments. I spent a lot of time pondering this, a lot of time making spreadsheets, as you can see here. There are some spreadsheets that I didn't even show in this. I did make a little calculator as well, that you can put in and see just what the difference is from expected outcome. You can see that if you have triple trigger, like I said, it's a difference of like 20-some% of what you would expect off the base rate. Or not 20, 40%. There's that number that I was telling you about before. You can see the actual difference in outcome based off of the skills and stuff. I'll be leaving the link to this spreadsheet in the description. Once again, if I forget, please remind me. But you can check out my work. You can check out the calculator here. Play around with it. Make a copy, though, obviously. But yeah, I've enjoyed talking about this and researching this. I may make a second video if there are unanswered questions that I didn't really get around to. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. If you learned something, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. And as always, have a wonderful day. Bye-bye now.